It's the complete opposite of the law. We've shown you without contradiction that is wrong. They also know that they cannot satisfy the three-part test of Brandenburg, as elucidated in the Bible Believers case. There was absolutely no evidence that Mr. Trump's words were directed to inciting imminent lawless action. There was no evidence that Mr. Trump intended his words to incite violence, and the violence was pre-planned and premeditated by a group of lawless actors who must be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, but it proves that his words weren't what set this into motion. What was the incitement? With no ability and no evidence to satisfy the existing constitutional standards, what are the House managers to do? They had to make up their own law. This is not only intellectually dishonest, folks, it's downright scary. What type of precedent would be set if the Senate did vote to convict? Can Congress now ignore Supreme Court precedent on the contours of protected free speech? Will Congress be permitted to continually make up their own legal standards and apply those new standards to elected officials' speech? This would allow Congress to use the awesome impeachment power as a weapon to impeach their fellow colleagues in the opposing party. This is not a precedent that this Senate can set here today. If the Senate endorses the House Democrats' absurd new theory, you will set a precedent that will trouble leaders from both parties, literally, for centuries to come. But that will not be the only disgraceful precedent to come from this case. This has been perhaps the most unfair and flagrantly unconstitutional proceeding in the history of the United States Senate. For the first time in history, Congress has asserted the right to try and punish a former president who is a private citizen. Nowhere in the Constitution is the power enumerated or implied. Congress has no authority, no right, and no business holding a trial of Citizen Trump, let alone a trial to deprive him of fundamental civil rights. There was mention of a January exception argument. The January exception argument is a creation of the House managers' own conduct by delaying. They sat on the article. They could have tried the president while he was still in office if they really believed he was an imminent threat. They didn't. The January exception is a red herring. It's nonsense. Because federal, state, and local authorities can investigate. Their January exception always expires on January 20th. House Democrats and this deeply unfair trial have shamefully trampled every tradition, norm, and standard of due process in a way I've never, ever seen before. Mr. Trump was given no right to review the so-called evidence against him at trial. He was given no opportunity to question its propriety. He was given no chance to engage in fact-finding. Much of what was introduced by the House was unverified, second or third-hand reporting cribbed from a biased news media, including stories based on anonymous sources whose identities aren't even known to them. Never mind my client. They manufactured and doctored evidence, so much so that they had to withdraw it. we had the evidence after we started the trial. They went on for 2 days. So in the evening, I was able to go back and take a really close look at the stuff. Myself and Mr. Castor and Ms. Bateman and Mr. Brennan, we all worked hard and looked at the evidence, 4 volumes of books in little tiny print. And we literally had, 12, 14 hours to really look at the evidence before we had to go on. And just in that short time of looking at the evidence, we saw them fabricating Twitter accounts. We saw the masked man sitting at his desk with the New York Times there. And when we looked closely, we found that the date was wrong, the check had been added. They fabricated evidence. They made it up. They never addressed that in their closing, as though it were acceptable, as though it were all right, as though that's the way it should be done here in the Senate of the United States of America. Fraud, flat out, fraud. Where I come from, in the courts that I practice in, there are very harsh repercussions for what they pulled in this trial. As we have shown, the House managers were caught creating false representations of tweets, manipulating videos, and introducing into the record completely discredited lies such as the Fine People hoax as factual evidence. Most of what the House managers have said and shown you would be inadmissible in any respectable court of law. They were not trying a case. They were telling a political tale, a fable, and a patently false one at that. House Democrats have denied due process and rushed the impeachment because they know that a fair trial would reveal Mr. Trump's innocence of the charges against him. The more actual evidence that comes out, the clearer it is that this was a pre-planned and premeditated attack, which his language in no way incited. Because their case is so weak, the House managers have taken a kitchen sink approach to the supposedly single article of impeachment. They allege that Mr. Trump incited the January 6th violence. They allege that he abused power by attempting to pressure Georgia Secretary of State Raffensperger to undermine the results of the 2020 election. And they allege that he gravely and endangered the democratic system by interfering with the peaceful transition of power. There's at least 3 things there. Under the Senate rules, each of these allegations must have been alleged in a separate article of impeachment. I need not remind this chamber that Rule 23 of the Rules of Procedure and Practice in the Senate when sitting on impeachment trials provides, in pertinent part, that an article of impeachment shall not be divisible thereon. Why is that? Because the article at issue here alleges multiple wrongs in the single article, it would be impossible to know if 2/3 of the members agreed on the entire article or just on parts of it as the basis for a vote to convict. Based on this alone, the Senate must vote to acquit Mr. Trump. You got to at least obey your own rules if it's not the Constitution you're going to obey. In short, this impeachment has been a complete charade from beginning to end. the entire spectacle has been nothing but the unhinged pursuit of a long-standing political vendetta against Mr. Trump by the opposition party. As we have shown, Democrats were obsessed with impeaching Mr. Trump from the very beginning of his term. The House Democrats tried to impeach him in his first year. They tried to impeach him in his second year. They did impeach him in his third year, and they impeached him again in his fourth year. And now they have conducted a phony impeachment show trial when he is a private citizen out of office. This hastily orchestrated and unconstitutional circus is the House Democrats' final desperate attempt to accomplish their obsessive desire of the last 5 years. Since the moment he stepped into the political arena, since my client stepped in, they have been possessed by an overwhelming zeal to vanquish an independent-minded outsider from the midst and to shame, demean, silence, and demonize his supporters in the desperate hope that they will never, ever pose an electoral challenge. We heard one of the congressmen on the screen. If you don't impeach him, he might be elected again. That's the fear. That's what's driving this impeachment. When you deliberate over your decision, there are 4 distinct grounds under which you must acquit my client. First is jurisdiction. There is no jurisdiction. And if you believe that, you still get to say it. 2, Rule 23. It had to be divisible. Each allegation had to be singularly set out in front of you so it could be voted on and to see if 2/3 of you think that they proved that case or not. They didn't do that. You got to ask yourself why. They know the Senate rules. They got them, and so did I. Why'd they do it? Because they hadn't investigated, first of all. But also, what they found out as they were preparing all of this, they couldn't do it. So if they threw as much in as they could and made as many bold, bald allegations as they could, then maybe 2/3 of you would fall for it. That's why the rules don't allow it to go that way. Due process, I've exhausted that subject. It's a really good reason for all of you in this chamber, to stop the politics, to read the Constitution and apply it to this proceeding, and acknowledge that the lack of due process, way over the top, shocking, and you must not stand for it. And of course, the First Amendment, the actual facts of this case. There were no words of incitement. 4 grounds. Nobody gets to tell you which ground to pick, and nobody gets to tell you how many grounds to consider. Senators, do not let House Democrats take this manacle crusade any further. The Senate does not have to go down this dark path of enmity and division. You do not have to indulge the impeachment lust, the dishonesty, and the hypocrisy. It is time to bring this unconstitutional political theater to an end. It is time to allow our nation to move forward. It is time to address the real business pressing this nation: the pandemic, our economy, racial inequality, economic and social inequality. These are the things that you need to be thinking and working on for all of us in America. All of us. With your vote, you can defend the Constitution, you can protect due process, and you can allow America's healing to begin. I urge the Senate to acquit and vindicate the Constitution of this great republic. Thank you.
Who yields time?
Heck yeah, he did a good job. My apologies, everyone. YouTube shut us down, and from what I hear, Right Side Broadcasting was also shut down. They've never green screened me before. That was interesting.
All of that, but perhaps 5 back to you. There's just a few things that I need to address, and so in an extraordinary and perhaps unprecedented act of self-restraint on my part, I will resist the opportunity to rebut every single false and illogical thing that you just heard, and I am going to be able to return to you, perhaps 22 or 23 minutes. Few points. One, we have definitely made some progress in the last few days, because a few days ago, the president's team, although I think it was perhaps a member who has since left the team, lectured us that this was not an insurrection and said that the impeachment managers were outrageous in using the word insurrection. Today, counsel in his closing statement said it was a violent insurrection, and he denounced it. And I would certainly love to see President Trump also call it a violent insurrection and denounce it too. And I believe, although I don't have a verbatim text, that counsel called for long sentences for the people who were involved. Again, I would love to hear that come from the president as well.
I'm pretty sure the president did denounce it the day after on a whole separate video.
The developed body of law that the Senate has for impeaching and convicting a president who incites violent insurrection against the Congress and the government of the United States. Well, I suppose that's true because it never occurred to any other president of the United States, from George Washington to John Adams to Thomas Jefferson to James Madison to James Monroe to Abraham Lincoln to Ronald Reagan to George W. Bush to Barack Obama to incite a violent insurrection against the Union. You're right, we've got no precedent for that. And so they think that that somehow is a mark in their favor. That's a score for them, that this Senate has to be the first one to define incitement of violent insurrection against the Union. And so the gentleman puts it on me. He says, inciting a president for committing incitement to violent insurrection against the Union is the new Raskin doctrine. We've tried to convince him that there are well-known principles and elements of incitement which we have talked to you about ad nauseum, and that this is an intrinsically, inherently fact-based judgment. But if that is the Raskin doctrine, that a president of the United States cannot incite violent insurrection against the Union and the Congress, then I embrace it, and I take it as an honor.
Why is he allowed to speak again? He already said his closing statement.
So I will accept that. And finally, the counsel goes back to Julian Bond's case, because I think in the final analysis, their best argument, as pathetically weak as it is really about the First Amendment. But remember, they keep talking about stifling President Trump's speech. Someone tell me when his speech has ever been stifled. He says exactly what he wants, whenever he wants. If and when you convict him for incitement of insurrection, he will continue to say whatever he wants on that day. Remember, they referred yesterday to interference with his liberty, which I found absolutely bizarre, because everybody knows that he will not spend 1 minute in prison or jail from conviction on these charges. It is a civil remedy to protect all of us, to protect the entire country, our children, our Constitution, our future. That's what impeachment, trial, conviction are all about. Julian Bond. See, I knew Julian Bond, so forgive me. Most people say, don't even respond to this stuff. I got to respond to this, okay?
But we don't want you to.
Bond was a civil rights activist who decided to go into politics, like the people in this room, like all of us who are in politics. And they tried to keep him out. He was a member of SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which really launched the voting rights movement in America. There's a great story that Bob Moses tells in his book called Radical Equations about, he was a graduate student in mathematics at Harvard, and he went down to Mississippi. You know why? Because he saw a picture in the New York Times of black civil rights protesters, college students, I think in North Carolina, AT&T, and he saw a picture of them on the cover of the New York Times, and they were sitting in at a lunch counter, and he looked at the picture and he said, they looked the way that I felt. They looked the way that I felt. And he said he had to go down south to Mississippi. And they launched the voting rights movement. That's where the phrase one person, one vote comes from. It was not invented by the Supreme Court. They would go door to door to try to register people to vote. But anyway, Julian Bond was part of that movement. The Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, nonviolence. It was the end and it was the means, nonviolence. And he ran for the state legislature in Georgia, a path other civil rights activists followed, like our great, late, beloved colleague, John Lewis, who's in our hearts today. And when he got elected, they wanted to try to keep him from being sworn into the Georgia legislature. And so they said, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee is taking a position against the Vietnam War. You're a member of SNCC. We're not going to admit you because you took a position against the Vietnam War. And the Supreme Court, in its wisdom, said you cannot prevent someone from swearing an oath to become a member of a legislative body because of a position that they took or a group they were a part of took before they got sworn in. That's the exact opposite of Donald Trump. He got elected to office. He swore an oath to the Constitution to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. He served as president for 4 years, right up until the end, when he wanted to exercise his rights under the imaginary January exception, and he incited a violent mob in insurrection to come up here, and we all know what happened. He is being impeached and convicted for violating his oath of office that he took. He's not being prevented from taking his oath in the first place. The First Amendment's on our side. He tried to overturn the will of the people, the voice of the people. He lost that election by more than 7 million votes. Some people don't want to admit it. Counsel for the president could not bring themselves to admit that the election's over. In answer to the question from the distinguished gentleman from Vermont, he refused to answer that. He said it was irrelevant, despite all of the evidence you've heard about the big lie and how that set the stage for his incitement of the insurrectionary violence against us. First Amendment is on our side. We are defending the Bill of Rights. We are defending the constitutional structure. We are defending the separation of powers. We're defending the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House.
Why is he allowed to speak again? I'm still trying to figure that out.
Better than a marauder and a member of that mob by inciting those people to come here. And in many ways, he was worse. He named the date, he named the time, and he brought them here, and now he must pay the price. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Raskin.
Mr. President.
The majority leader is recognized.
Mr. President, the Senate is now ready to vote on the article of impeachment. And after that is done, we will adjourn the court of impeachment.
Oh, the defense doesn't get a second closing statement?
Of impeachment.
Article 1, incitement of an insurrection.
Senate will be in order.
The Constitution provides that the House of Representatives shall have the sole power of impeachment, and that the President shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. Further, Section 3 of the 14th Amendment to the Constitution prohibits any person who has engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the United States from holding any office under the United States. In his conduct while President of the United States and in violation of his constitutional oath, faithfully to execute the office of the President of the United States and, to the best of his ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States, and in violation of his constitutional duty to take care that the laws be faithfully executed, Donald John Trump engaged in high crimes and misdemeanors by inciting violence against the government of the United States in that, on January 6, 2021, pursuant to the 12th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States, the Vice President of the United States, the House of Representatives, and the Senate met at the United States Capitol for a joint session of Congress to count the votes of the Electoral College. In the months preceding the joint session, President Trump repeatedly issued false statements asserting that the presidential election results were the product of widespread fraud and should not be accepted by the American people or certified by state or federal officials. Shortly before the joint session commenced, President Trump addressed a crowd at the Ellipse in Washington, D.C. There he reiterated false claims that we won this election and we won it by a landslide. He also willfully made statements that in context encouraged and foreseeably resulted in lawless action at the Capitol, such as, if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore. Thus incited by President Trump, members of the crowd he had addressed in an attempt to, among other objectives, interfere with the joint session's solemn constitutional duty to certify the results of the 2020 presidential election, unlawfully breached and vandalized the Capitol, injured and killed law enforcement personnel, menaced members of Congress, the Vice President, and congressional personnel, and engaged in other violent, deadly, destructive, and seditious acts. President Trump's conduct on January 6, 2021, followed his prior efforts to subvert and obstruct the certification of the results of the 2020 presidential election. Those prior efforts included a phone call on January 2, 2021, during which President Trump urged the Secretary of State of Georgia, Brad Raffensperger, to find enough votes to overturn the Georgia presidential election results and threatened security Raffensperger if he failed to do so. In all this, President Trump gravely endangered the security of the United States and its institutions of government. He threatened the integrity of the democratic system, interfered with the peaceful transition of power, and imperiled a co-equal branch of government. He therefore betrayed his trust as president to the manifest injury of the people of the United States. Wherefore, Donald John Trump, by such conduct, has demonstrated that he will remain a threat to national security, democracy, and the Constitution if allowed to remain in office, and has acted in a manner grossly incompatible with self-government and the rule of law. Donald John Trump thus warrants impeachment and trial, removal from office, and disqualification to hold and enjoy any office of honor, trust, or profit under the United States, and demand that you, the said Donald John Trump, should be put to answer the accusations as set forth in this article, and that such proceedings, examinations, trials, and judgments might be thereupon had as are agreeable to law and justice.
Each senator, when his or her name is called, will stand in his or her place, and they'll vote guilty or not guilty as required by Rule 23 of the Senate Rules of Impeachment. Article 1, Section 3, Clause 6 of the Constitution, regarding the vote required for conviction on impeachment, provides that, quote, no person shall be convicted without the concurrence of 2/3 of the members present, close quote. The question is on the article of impeachment. Senators, How say you? Is the respondent Donald John Trump guilty or not guilty? A roll call vote is required, and the clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Baldwin. Ms. Baldwin, guilty. Mr. Barrasso. Mr. Barrasso, not guilty.
I'm gonna keep tally.
Mr. Bennett, guilty. Mrs. Blackburn. Mrs. Blackburn, not guilty. Mr. Blumenthal. Mr. Blumenthal, guilty. Mr. Blunt. Mr. Blunt, not guilty. Mr. Booker. Mr. Booker, guilty. Mr. Bozeman. Mr. Bozeman, not guilty. Mr. Braun. Mr. Braun, not guilty. Mr. Brown. Mr. Brown, guilty. Mr. Burr. Mr. Burr, guilty. Ms. Cantwell. Ms. Cantwell, guilty. Mrs. Capito. Mrs. Capito, not guilty. Mr. Cardin. Mr. Cardin, guilty. Mr. Carper. Mr. Carper, guilty. Mr. Casey. Mr. Casey, guilty. Mr. Cassidy. Mr. Cassidy, guilty. Ms. Collins. Ms. Collins, guilty. Mr. Coons. Mr. Coons, guilty. Mr. Cornyn. Mr. Cornyn, not guilty. Ms. Cortez Masto. Ms. Cortez Masto, guilty. Mr. Cotton. Mr. Cotton, not guilty. Mr. Kramer. Mr. Kramer, not guilty. Mr. Crapo. Mr. Crapo, not guilty. Mr. Cruz. Mr. Cruz, not guilty. Mr. Daines. Mr. Daines, not guilty. Ms. Duckworth. Ms. Duckworth, guilty. Mr. Durbin. Mr. Durbin, guilty. Ms. Ernst. Ms. Ernst, not guilty. Mrs. Feinstein. Mrs. Feinstein, guilty. Mrs. Fisher. Mrs. Fisher, not guilty. Mrs. Gillibrand. Mrs. Gillibrand, guilty. Mr. Graham. Mr. Graham, not guilty. Mr. Grassley. Not guilty. Mr. Grassley, not guilty. Mr. Haggerty. Mr. Haggerty, not guilty. Ms. Hassan. Ms. Hassan, guilty. Mr. Hawley. Mr. Hawley, not guilty. Mr. Heinrich. Mr. Heinrich, guilty. Mr. Hickenlooper. Mr. Hickenlooper, guilty. Ms. Hirono. Ms. Hirono, guilty. Mr. Hoven. Mr. Hoven, not guilty. Mrs. Hyde-Smith. Not guilty. Mrs. Hyde-Smith, not guilty. Mr. Inhofe. Mr. Inhofe, not guilty. Mr. Johnson. Not guilty. Mr. Johnson, not guilty. Mr. Kane. Guilty. Mr. Kane, guilty. Mr. Kelly. Guilty. Mr. Kelly, guilty. Mr. Kennedy. Not guilty. Mr. Kennedy, not guilty. Mr. King. Guilty. Mr. King, guilty. Ms. Klobuchar. Ms. Klobuchar, guilty. Mr. Langford. Mr. Langford, not guilty. Mr. Leahy.
Guilty.
Mr. Leahy, guilty. Mr. Lee. Mr. Lee, not guilty. Mr. Lujan. Mr. Lujan, guilty. Ms. Lummis. Ms. Lummis, not guilty. Mr. Manchin. Mr. Manchin, guilty. Mr. Markey. Mr. Markey, guilty. Mr. Marshall. Mr. Marshall, not guilty. Mr. McConnell. Mr. McConnell, not guilty. Mr. Menendez.
They're ahead by 2 right now.
Mr. Menendez, guilty. Mr. Merkley. Mr. Merkley, guilty. Mr. Moran. Mr. Moran, not guilty. Ms. Murkowski. Ms. Murkowski, guilty. Mr. Murphy. Mr. Murphy, guilty. Mrs. Murray. Mrs. Murray, guilty. Mr. Ossoff. Mr. Ossoff, guilty. Mr. Padilla. Mr. Padilla, guilty. Mr. Paul. Mr. Paul, not guilty. Mr. Peters. Mr. Peters, guilty. Mr. Portman. Mr. Portman, not guilty. Mr. Reed. Mr. Reed, guilty. Mr. Risch. Mr. Risch, not guilty. Mr. Romney. Mr. Romney, guilty. Ms. Rosen. Ms. Rosen, guilty. Mr. Rounds. Mr. Rounds, not guilty. Mr. Rubio. Mr. Rubio, not guilty. Mr. Sanders. Mr. Sanders, guilty. Mr. Sass. Mr. Sass, guilty. Mr. Schatz. Mr. Schatz, guilty. Mr. Schumer. Mr. Schumer, guilty. Mr. Scott of Florida. Mr. Scott of Florida, not guilty. Mr. Scott of South Carolina. Mr. Scott of South Carolina, not guilty. Mrs. Shaheen. Mrs. Shaheen, guilty. Mr. Shelby.
I think they have 46 guilty.
Not guilty. Ms. Sinema. Ms. Sinema, guilty. Ms. Smith. Ms. Smith, guilty. Ms. Stabenow. Ms. Stabenow, guilty. Mr. Sullivan. Mr. Sullivan, not guilty. Mr. Tester. Mr. Tester, guilty. Mr. Thune. Mr. Thune, not guilty. Mr. Tillis. Mr. Tillis, not guilty. Mr. Toomey. Mr. Toomey, guilty. Mr. Tuberville. Mr. Tuberville, not guilty. Mr. Van Hollen. Mr. Van Hollen, guilty. Mr. Warner. Mr. Warner, guilty. Mr. Warnock. Mr. Warnock, guilty. Ms. Warren. Ms. Warren, guilty. Mr. Whitehouse. Mr. Whitehouse, guilty. Mr. Wicker. Mr. Wicker, not guilty. Mr. Wyden. Mr. Wyden, guilty. Mr. Young. Mr. Young, not guilty.
I think it's 57 guilty. I might be off by 1 or 2. I was trying to read the chat while counting.
Unless you had a script.
There's no reason it should have been that close. Like, not at all. They didn't even have any evidence. That shows you. It shows you how it goes. They're all buddies. Trash.
The yeas are 57. The nays are 43. 2/3 of the senators present not having voted guilty. The Senate judges that the respondent, Donald John Trump, former President of the United States, is not guilty as charged in the article of impeachment. The presiding officer directs judgment to be entered in accordance with the judgment of the Senate as follows. The Senate, having tried Donald John Trump, former President of the United States, upon one article of impeachment exhibited against him by the House of Representatives, and 2/3 of the senators present not having found him guilty of the charge contained therein, it is therefore ordered and adjudged that the said Donald John Trump be, and he is hereby acquitted of the charge in said article.
Mr. President.
Majority Leader is recognized.
Mr. President, I send an order to the desk.
And the clerk will report.
Ordered that the Secretary be directed to communicate to the Secretary of State as provided by Rule 23 of the Rules of Procedure and Practice in the Senate when sitting on impeachment trials, and also to the House of Representatives the judgment of the Senate in the case of Donald John Trump, and transmit a certified copy of the judgment to each.
Without objection, the order will be entered. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I move that the Senate, sitting as a court of impeachment on the article against Donald John Trump, adjourn sine die.
And without objection, the motion is agreed to. The Senate, sitting as a court of impeachment, stands adjourned sine die. And could I have order, please? The presiding officer, the acting sergeant at arms will escort the House managers out of the Senate chamber. And in order.
They're going to cry in the car. At least what should have happened did happen, but it shouldn't have been that close. There is no reason it should have been that close. They didn't provide any evidence. They just lied and cried for 5 days. And they got 2 closing statements. And they still lost. Trash. Just hot trash. Go fix your hair, rat skin.
Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, can we have order?
The Senate is not in order, and the Senate will be in order.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent the Senate be in a period of morning business with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each.
Without objection, is so ordered. Does any senator seek recognition? Senator from New York, Majority Leader.
Mr. President, the case of Donald Trump's second impeachment trial was open. Mr. President, can we have order, please?
The senator is right. The Senate is not in order. Senate will be in order. Senate will be in order. Please take your conversations off the floor.
Thank you, Mr.
Senator
President.
from New York.
The case of Donald Trump's second impeachment trial was open and shut. President Trump told a lie, a big lie, that the election was stolen and that he was the rightful winner. He laid the groundwork for this big lie in the months before the election. He told the big lie on election night, and he repeated the big lie more than 100 times in the weeks afterwards. He summoned his supporters to Washington, assembled them on the ellipse, whipped them into a frenzy, and directed them at the Capitol. And then he watched as the violence unfolded and the Capitol was breached. and his own vice president fled for his life, and President Trump did nothing. None of these facts were up for debate. We saw it, we heard it, we lived it. This was the first presidential impeachment trial in history in which all senators were not only judges and jurors, but witnesses to the constitutional crime that was committed. The former president inspired, directed, and propelled a mob to violently prevent the peaceful transfer of power, subvert the will of the people, and illegally keep that president in power. There is nothing more un-American than that. There is nothing more antithetical to our democracy. There is nothing more insulting to the generations of American patriots who gave their lives to defend our form of government. This was the most egregious violation of the presidential oath of office and a textbook example, a classic example of an impeachable offense worthy of the Constitution's most severe remedy.
Obviously not.
To the incontrovertible fact of Donald Trump's guilt, the Senate was subject to a feeble and sometimes incomprehensible defense of the former president. Unable to dispute the case on the merits, the former president's counsel treated us to partisan vitriol, false equivalence, and outright falsehoods. We heard the roundly debunked jurisdictional argument that the Senate cannot try a former official, a position that would mean that any president could simply resign to avoid accountability for an impeachable offense, a position which in effect would render the Senate powerless to ever enforce the disqualification clause in the Constitution.
Does he realize it's over?
The president's counsel told the Senate that the Constitution was unconstitutional. Thankfully, the Senate took a firm stance, set a firm precedent with a bipartisan vote in favor of our power to try former officials for acts they committed while in office. We heard the preposterous claim that the former president's incitement to violence was protected by the First Amendment. The First Amendment right to free speech protects Americans from jail, not presidents from impeachment. If the president had said during World War II that, quote, Germany should attack the United States on Long Island, we've left it undefended, I suspect Congress would have considered that an impeachable offense. Finally, the defense counsel said that President Trump was not directly responsible for the violence at the Capitol. Quote, his words were merely a metaphor, his directions were merely suggestions, and the violent mob was just a spontaneous demonstration. But wind the clock back and ask yourself, if at any point Donald Trump did not do the things he did, would the attack on the Capitol have happened? There's only one answer to this question. Of course not. If President Trump hadn't told his supporters to march to the Capitol, if he hadn't implored them to come to Washington on January 6th in the first place, if he hadn't repeatedly lied to them that the election was stolen, their country was being taken from them, the attack would not have happened, could not have happened. January 6th would not have happened but for the actions of Donald Trump. Here's what the Republican leader of the Senate said. The mob that perpetrated the, quote, failed insurrection, unquote, was on January 6th was, quote, provoked by President Trump. You want another word for provoke? How about incite? Yet still, the vast majority of the Senate Republican caucus, including the Republican leader, voted to acquit former President Trump, signing their names in the columns of history alongside his name forever. January 6th will live as a day of infamy in the history of the United States of America. The failure to convict Donald Trump will live as a vote of infamy in the history of the United States Senate. 5 years ago, Republican senators lamented what might become of their party if Donald Trump became their presidential nominee and standard bearer. Just look at what has happened. Look at what Republicans have been forced to defend. Look at what Republicans have chosen to forgive. The former president tried to overturn the results of a legitimate election and provoked an assault on our own government. And well over half the Senate Republican conference decided to condone it. The most despicable act that any president has ever committed, and the majority of Republicans cannot summon the courage or the morality to condemn it.
Ooh, he's crying hard, ain't he?
Wasn't about choosing country over party, even not that. This was about choosing country over Donald Trump. And 43 Republican members chose Trump. They chose Trump. It should be a weight on their conscience today, and it shall be a weight on their conscience in the future. As sad as that fact is, as condemnable as the decision was, it is still true that the final vote on Donald Trump's conviction was the largest and most bipartisan vote of any presidential impeachment trial in American history. I salute those Republican patriots who did the right thing. It wasn't easy. We know that. Let their votes be a message to the American people. Because, my fellow Americans, if this nation is going to long endure, we as a people cannot sanction the former president's Congress. Because if lying about the results of an election is acceptable, if instigating a mob against the government is considered permissible, if encouraging political violence becomes the norm, it will be open season on our democracy. And everything will be up for grabs by whoever has the biggest clubs, the sharpest spears, the most powerful guns. By not recognizing the heinous crime that Donald Trump committed against the Constitution, Republican senators have not only risked, but potentially invited the same danger that was just visited upon us. So let me say this. Despite the results of the vote on Donald Trump's conviction in the court of impeachment, he deserves to be convicted, and I believe he will be convicted in the court of public opinion. He deserves to be permanently discredited, and I believe he has been discredited in the eyes of the American people and in the judgment of history. Even though Republican senators prevented the Senate from disqualifying Donald Trump for any office of honor, trust, or profit under these United States, there is no question Donald Trump has disqualified himself. I hope, I pray, and I believe that the American people will make sure of that. And if Donald Trump ever stands for public office again, and after everything we have seen this week, I hope, I pray, and I believe that he will meet the unambiguous rejection by the American people. 6 hours after the attack on January 6th, after the carnage and mayhem was shown on every television screen in America, President Trump told his supporters to, quote, "Remember this day forever." I ask the American people to heed his words. Remember that day forever, but not for the reasons the former president intended. Remember the panic in the voices over the radio dispatch, the rhythmic pounding of fists and
Weren't these people talking about you win some, you lose some, but you need to hold integrity even if you lose? Weren't they just saying that like a month ago?
flying through the halls of our union? Remember the screams of the bloody officer crushed between the onrushing mob and a doorway to the Capitol, his body trapped in the breach. Remember the 3 Capitol police officers who lost their lives. Remember that those rioters actually succeeded in delaying Congress from certifying the election. Remember how close our democracy came to ruin. My fellow Americans, remember that day, January 6th, forever. The final terrible legacy of the 45th President of the United States, and undoubtedly our worst. Let it live on in infamy, a stain on Donald John Trump that can never, never be washed away. Mr. President, on Monday, we'll recognize President's Day. Part of the commemoration in the Senate will be the annual reading of Washington's farewell address. Aside from winning the Revolutionary War, I consider it his greatest contribution to American civil life. And it had nothing to do with the words he spoke, but the example it set. Washington's farewell address established for all time that no one had the right to the office of the presidency, that it belonged to the people. What an amazing legacy. What an amazing gift to the future generations. The knowledge that this country will always be greater than any one person, even our most renowned. That's why members of both parties take turns reading Washington's address once a year in full into the record, to pledge common attachment to the selflessness at the core of our democratic system. This trial was about the final acts of a president who represents the very antithesis of our first president and sought to place one man before the entire country, himself. Let the record show, before God, history, and the solemn oath we swear to the Constitution, that there was only one correct verdict in this trial, guilty. And I pray that while justice was not done in this trial, it will be carried forward by the American people who, above any of us in this chamber, determine the destiny of our great nation.
Is that incitement? No reason to cry so hard in front of everybody and put it on the record. Jeez, guy, you could have just walked out, could have just left. You didn't have to give a whole speech on how butthurt you are. Jesus. You know his car seat's full of sand. Get up out of here. Go sit down somewhere.
The Republican leader.
January 6th was a disgrace. American citizens attacked their own government. They used terrorism to try to stop a specific piece of domestic business they did not like. Fellow Americans beat and bloodied our own police. They stormed the Senate floor. They tried to hunt down the Speaker of the House. They built a gallows and chanted about murdering the Vice President. They did this because they'd been fed wild falsehoods by the most powerful man on earth. Because he was angry he lost an election.
You guys are angry you lost a trial.
Actions preceded the riot were a disgraceful dereliction of duty. The House accused the former president of, quote, incitement. That is a specific term from the criminal law. Let me just put that aside for a moment and reiterate something I said weeks ago. There's no question, none, that President Trump is practically and morally responsible for provoking the events of the day.
Then why was he just acquitted from incitement?
People who stormed this building believed that
These people are stupid.
and instructions of their president. And having that belief was a foreseeable consequence of the growing crescendo of false statements, conspiracy theories, and reckless hyperbole, which the defeated president kept shouting into the largest megaphone on planet Earth. The issue is not only the president's intemperate language on January 6th. It is not just his endorsement of remarks in which an associate urged, quote, trial by combat. It was also the entire manufactured atmosphere of looming catastrophe, the increasingly wild myths about a reverse landslide election that was somehow being stolen, some secret coup by our now president. Now, I defended the president's right to bring any complaints to our legal system. The legal system spoke. The Electoral College spoke. As I stood up and said clearly at that time, the election was settled. It was over. But that just really opened a new chapter of even wilder, and more unfounded claims. The leader of the free world cannot spend weeks thundering that shadowy forces are stealing our country and then feign surprise when people believe him and do reckless things. Now, sadly, many politicians sometimes make overheated comments or use metaphors. We saw that unhinged listeners might take literally, but that was different. That's different from what we saw. This was an intensifying crescendo of conspiracy theories orchestrated by an outgoing president who seemed determined to either overturn the voters' decision or else torch our institutions on the way out. The unconscionable behavior did not end when the violence actually began. Whatever our ex-president claims he thought might happen that day, whatever reaction he says he meant to produce, by that afternoon, we know he was watching the same live television as the rest of us. A mob was assaulting the Capitol in his name. These criminals were carrying his banners, hanging his flags, and screaming their loyalty to him. It was obvious that only President Trump could end this. He was the only one who could. Former aides publicly begged him to do so. Loyal allies frantically called the administration. The president did not act swiftly. He did not do his job. He didn't take steps so federal law could be faithfully executed and order restored. No. Instead, according to public reports, he watched television happily, as the chaos unfolded. Kept pressing his scheme to overturn the election. Now, even after it was clear to any reasonable observer that Vice President Pence was in serious danger, even as the mob, carrying Trump banners, was beating cops and breaching perimeters, the president sent a further tweet attacking his own vice president. Now, predictably and foreseeably under the circumstances, members of the mob seem to interpret this as a further inspiration to lawlessness and violence not surprisingly. Later, even when the president did half-heartedly begin calling for peace, he didn't call right away for the riot to end. He did not tell the mob to depart until even later. And even then, with police officers bleeding and broken glass covering Capitol floors, he kept repeating election lies and praising the criminals. In recent weeks, our ex-president's associates have tried to use the 74 million Americans who voted to re-elect him as a kind of human shield against criticism. Using the 74 million who voted for him as a kind of a human shield against criticism. Anyone who decries his awful behavior is accused of insulting millions of voters. That's an absurd deflection. 74 million Americans did not invade the Capitol. Hundreds of rioters did. 74 million Americans did not engineer the campaign of disinformation and rage that provoked it. One person did, just one. Now, I've made my view of this episode very plain. But our system of government gave the Senate a specific task. The Constitution gives us a particular role. This body is not invited to act as the nation's overarching moral tribunal. We're not free to work backward from whether the accused party might personally deserve some kind of punishment. Justice Joseph Story, our nation's first great constitutional scholar, as he explained nearly 200 years ago, the process of impeachment and conviction is a narrow tool for a narrow purpose. Story explained this limited tool exists to, quote, secure the state against gross official misdemeanors, end quote. That is, to protect the country from government officers. If President Trump were still in office, I would have carefully considered whether the House managers proved their specific charge. By the strict criminal standard, the president's speech probably was not incitement. However, in the context of impeachment, the Senate might have decided this was acceptable shorthand for the reckless actions that preceded the riot. But in this case, the question is moot because former President Trump is constitutionally not eligible for conviction. Now, this is a close question, no doubt. Donald Trump was the president when the House voted, though not when the House chose to deliver the papers. Brilliant scholars argue both sides of this jurisdictional question. The text is legitimately ambiguous. I respect my colleagues who've reached either conclusion. But after intense reflection, I believe the best constitutional reading shows that Article 2, Section 4 exhausts the set of persons who can legitimately be impeached, tried, or convicted. It's the president, it's the vice president, and civil officers. We have no power to convict and disqualify a former office holder who is now a private citizen. Here is Article 2, Section 4. Quote, the president, the vice president, and all civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors, end quote. Now, everyone basically agrees that the second half of that sentence exhausts the legitimate grounds for conviction. The debates around the Constitution's framing make that abundantly clear. Congress cannot convict for reasons besides those. It therefore follows that the list of persons in that same sentence is also exhaustive. There's no reason why one list would be exhaustive, but the other would not. Article 2, Section 4 must limit both why impeachment and conviction can occur and to whom. And to whom. If this provision does not limit impeachment and conviction powers, then it has no limits at all. The House has sole power of impeachment, and the Senate's sole power to try all impeachments would create an unlimited circular logic empowering Congress to ban any private citizen from federal office. Now, that's an incredible claim, but it's the argument the House managers seem to be making. One manager said the House and Senate have, quote, absolute, unqualified jurisdictional power, end quote. Well, that was very honest, because there is no limiting principle in the constitutional text that would empower the Senate to convict former officers that would not also let them convict and disqualify any private citizen. An absurd end result to which no one subscribes. Article 2, Section 4 must have force. It tells us the president, the vice president, and civil officers may be impeached and convicted. Donald Trump's no longer the president. Likewise, the provision states that officers subject to impeachment and conviction shall be removed from office if convicted. Shall be removed from office if convicted. As Justice Story explained, the Senate, upon conviction, is bound in all cases to enter a judgment of removal from office. Removal is mandatory upon conviction. Clearly, he explained, that mandatory sentence cannot be applied to someone who's left office. The entire process revolves around removal. If removal becomes impossible, conviction becomes insensible. In one light, it certainly does seem counterintuitive that an office holder can elude Senate conviction by resignation or expiration of term, an argument we heard made by the managers. But this underscores that impeachment was never meant to be the final forum for American justice. Never meant to be the final forum for American justice. Impeachment, conviction, and removal are a specific intra-governmental safety valve. It is not the criminal justice system where individual accountability is the paramount goal. Indeed, Justice Story specifically reminded that while former officials were not eligible for impeachment or conviction, they were, and this is extremely important, still liable to be tried and punished in the ordinary tribunals of justice. Put another way, in the language of today, President Trump is still liable for everything he did while he was in office as an ordinary citizen. Unless the statute of limitations is run, still liable for everything he did while he was in office. Didn't get away with anything yet. We have a criminal justice system in this country. We have civil litigation. And former presidents are not immune from being accountable by either one. I believe the Senate was right not to grab power the Constitution doesn't give us. And the Senate was right not to entertain some light-speed sham process to try to outrun the loss of jurisdiction. It took both sides more than a week just to produce their pretrial briefs. Speaker Pelosi's own scheduling decisions conceded what President Biden publicly confirmed: a Senate verdict before Inauguration Day was never possible. Now, Mr. President, this has been a dispiriting time. But the Senate has done our duty. The framers' firewall held up again. On January the 6th, we returned to our posts and certified the election. We were uncowed.
5 days wasn't enough. He's going to just sit here and recap the same information we've heard over and over again.
And since then, we resisted the clamor to defy our own constitutional guardrails in hot pursuit of a particular outcome. We refused to continue a cycle of recklessness by straining our own constitutional boundaries in response.
We're going to do the shout-outs if he ever stops talking.
The Senate's decision today does not condone anything that happened on or before that terrible day. It simply shows that senators did what the former president failed to do. We put our constitutional duty first.
President. The senator from Maryland.
Thank you, Mr. President. I take this time to explain why I voted to convict the former President of the United States, Donald Trump, of the articles of impeachment presented by the House of Representatives in regards to the incitement of insurrection. Throughout his presidency, Donald J. Trump has violated his oath of office to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. There are many examples that I could give of how he's violated his oath of office. I could also cite the basis of the first articles of impeachment that were tried last year as violating his oath of office. But by far, Mr. President, the most egregious violation of his oath of office took place in his incitement of insurrection that occurred with the attack on this Capitol on January the 6th. But it started well before January 6th. The seeds were planted a long time ago, and even before the November elections, when President Trump pointed out, when the polls were showing that he might lose in the election, that he refused to acknowledge that he would accept the election results if he lost. He didn't say that once before the November elections. He said it on several occasions. Talked about a rigged election, talked about a fraudulent election, talked about the election being taken away from us, the victory, with no evidence of voter fraud. One of the key provisions of our Constitution, of our democracy, is the peaceful transition of power. Donald Trump called that into question prior to the November 3rd elections. Then came the November 3rd elections. And shortly thereafter, Joe Biden was declared to be the winner. Why? Because he had the most votes, most populist votes, over 7 million. But he was declared the winner because of electoral votes, 306 to 232. By the way, the same electoral margin that Donald Trump won 4 years earlier, in which Donald Trump called a landslide. But then came the legal challenges by President Trump. He didn't accept the electoral vote or the declared elections. And he has his right to contest the elections in the court, asking for recounts or asking for challenges.
What is he raising his voice for? It's already over. I don't know what he's yelling for.
Widespread fraud that would have changed the results in any one of the states, let alone enough electoral vote changes to change the outcome of the election. But did he stop after he was denied relief in all of those legal challenges? The answer is no. He further contested by trying to inappropriately interfere with state election officials and state public officials, urging them to take action to change the certificated results.
Is he gonna cry?
We have many examples that during this period of time he was talking about a fraudulent election, a stolen election, all the different things about raising questions as to the legitimacy of the voices of the people of this nation. We have so many examples of his interference, but we actually have the tape of his conversation with the Georgia Secretary of State that we all heard, and heard how the president tried to intimidate and threaten the Secretary of State of Georgia in order to change the certified election results from the votes of the people of Georgia.
Well, that's an inaccurate description of that recording. He's big mad, isn't he? He's real big mad. He's gonna cry, but it's too late. It's too late. It's all over. He was acquitted. You don't need to cry, sir. You'll be okay. It'll be all right.
He went to his Department of Justice, believing the Department of Justice is his Department of Justice, not the Department of Justice of the United States of America. Now, let's remember that the Department of Justice had found no widespread corruption. In fact, they had determined this is one of the freest elections, one of the least problem elections that we've had. Didn't stop President Trump from trying to intimidate and order his Department of Justice to conduct an additional investigation to find fraud to overturn the will of the people, once again violating his oath to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States. He continued to do this contrary to his constitutional obligations. Corrupt election, stop the steal, rigged elections, tremendous fraud, all words that he used.
I wonder how many of these people are going to stand up and tell us why their feelings are hurt and why they voted the way they voted. And I don't know. I wish they would wrap it up. 5 days is enough of hearing the same stuff over and over and over. And this guy is getting emotional, and nobody else is even there. It's just, Mr. Chairman, will you please just hear me cry? Will you please hear me cry? I feel some type of way. All this sand is wearing me out.
Motivated to action because he knew he can motivate his followers. He put himself before the nation, before his responsibilities as President of the United States. he put his own self-interest above his responsibilities under the Constitution of the United States and to the people of this nation. And then he summoned his loyal following to Washington on January 6th. He knew they would come. He knew dangerous people were in the group. He knew the Proud Boys were there, which he had directly said, stand back and stand by. He knew that they were ready for violent action. And then he incited the mob to action on January 6th. We know the words that he used. We saw the videos. It's part of the record of the impeachment trial. We will never surrender. We will never concede. We will stop the steal, stolen election. All words that he had been using during the entire 2020 election cycle, particularly when he thought he was going to lose. But the most damning part of the president's violation of his oath of office, the most serious part, is what he did and did not do after seeing the violence erupt in the United States Capitol, after the Capitol was penetrated.
It was what?
Being committed, where we knew that the members of Congress were in danger. The Vice President of the United States was in danger. The people that work here were in danger. The people, the press, all the people that are in the Capitol, legitimately, were at danger. We all saw that. And the President of the United States knew of that. And he did nothing to stop the violence. He could have called off his loyalist and told them to get out of the Capitol. He didn't do that. He could have sent in the National Guard in order to protect us. He didn't do that. And he never condemned the participants in this mob in penetrating the Capitol for what they did. I'm going to sort of summarize my feeling about that by agreeing with Representative Liz Cheney, the House Republican Conference Chair, who said on the floor of the House, and let me just quote her statement, "The President of the United States summoned this mob, assembled..."
Press 1 if I can read the shout-outs over this guy crying, saying the same stuff we've heard over and over for 5 days. Let's take a real vote here. We're not going to use Dominion.
And forcefully intervened to stop the violence. He did not. There has never been a greater betrayal by a president of the United States of his office and his oath to the Constitution. I agree with that. President Trump violated his oath of office to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States.
This guy's word choice is terrible.
But let's take a look at what he did do.
All right, let's get these shout-outs in. We've heard all of this. Lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots. Let's see. I gotta read quite a few shout-outs since YouTube wanted to shut me down, bastards. All right. Where is the bottom of this list? You guys are so awesome. Thank you so much for sticking with me through all this nonsense. He was acquitted. I thought that was going to be it. They took the vote. He's not guilty. Another 5 hours of crying. I didn't know it was going to be that way. So, let's proceed. If I could find the end of the list here. These are good problems to have. The violence. Why can I not find the bottom of the list? I wonder how many of these people are related to the protesters, and that's why they don't talk about the protesters. They just refer to them as protesters and rioters. Anyways, thank you so much, Dina, basketball fan, M&R, JJ Money, the Free Birdie, Josh, Jen, B Diggs, Scott, Puddin' Puss, Lisa, Julie, Daniel, TX Sweet Tea, Katie, Heaven Mag, Honey, Juan, Julie, Mick, Mantra, Tracy, Greg, for all your donations and all your support. I really appreciate all of you. Hopefully all of you are still here to hear your shout out. I try not to talk over people. I know not everyone's here to hear me speak. Thank you so much, Prairie Wind. I really appreciate you. And let's go for the membership program. I gotta scroll all the way back down to the list. Let's see. Oh, come on, come on. Thank you so much, Slenderella, 748 Gmail, CDA 1615, McMay Z, Richard, Bobby Joe, Stephanie, and Quinn for joining the membership program, and welcome to the family. You're officially hooligans. And thank you so much, Mike, for your donation and your support. I really appreciate all of you. It has been a long 5 days. I really wish I could wrap it up, but I should really cover this all the way to the end of the crying. I understand if you guys can't hang out, but it's part of my job. I need to cover it in its entirety. I don't need people saying I'm cutting parts out and I'm censoring the crybabies and all the Sandy hoo-has in the clubhouse. I gotta cover it all. So thank you guys so much for being here. I really appreciate all of you. We're going to sit here through all of this, but if you must go, I totally understand. I have to record all of it for the archive. So thank you all. I really appreciate you more than I can put into words. You guys are the best hooligans a king could have. I really appreciate all of you.
Rather than telling his people to go home, rather than being concerned about the safety of the Vice President or the members of Congress, as the President of the United States should have been doing. He violated his oath of office over and over and over again, pattern and practice that we have seen for so long. It clearly establishes that he incited an insurrection against our country, that the facts included as basis for the articles of impeachment brought to us by the House of Representatives has been proven. The purpose of impeachment is not just the accountability for the president, but also to protect our Constitution, to make sure this conduct never happens again. No one is above the law, including the President of the United States. Everyone who was responsible for an insurrection that occurred on January 6th should be held accountable, from those who broke into the Capitol and caused the harm and damage to the President of the United States, who incited the violence. That's why I voted to convict President Trump of the articles of impeachment for inciting an insurrection, and that's why I would have voted to disqualify him from ever holding an office of trust again. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor. And can I ask unanimous consent that my entire statement be put in the record?
There's no objection.
Did he just ask for his entire statement to be removed from the record? Well, we didn't want to hear you say that. Why did you sit there and say that for 20 minutes? Nobody cares. And how can you still make accusations of incitement when it was just ruled that that's not true? These people, they just live by their own rules. Oh, let's hear this.
Mr. President, the hallmark of our American democracy is the peaceful transfer of power after the voters choose their leaders. In America, we accept election results even if our candidate does not prevail. If a candidate believes that there is fraud, the courts can hear and decide those issues. Otherwise, the authority to govern is vested in the duly elected officials. Mr. President, on January 6th, this Congress gathered in the Capitol to count the votes of the Electoral College pursuant to the process set forth in the 12th Amendment to the Constitution. At the same time, a mob stormed the Capitol, determined to stop Congress from carrying out our constitutional duty. Mr. President, that attack was not a spontaneous outbreak of violence. Rather, it was the culmination of a steady stream of provocations by President Trump that were aimed at overturning the results of the presidential election. The president's unprecedented efforts to discredit the election results did not begin on January 6th. Rather, he planted the seeds of doubt many weeks before votes were cast on November 3rd. He repeatedly told his supporters that only a rigged election could cause him to lose. Thus began President Trump's crusade to undermine public confidence in the presidential election unless he won. Early on the morning of November 4th, as the ballots continued to be counted, President Trump claimed victory and asserted that Democrats were trying to steal the election. On November 8th, the day after several meetings.
Thank you so much, Sniff and Glue, for your donation and your support. I really appreciate you. I'm not really concerned with talking over these people. They're taking turns saying the same exact words over and over and over again, like it makes a difference. Just, my goodness.
Mr. President, his post-election campaign to change the outcome began. Over the ensuing days,
Thank you so much, James, for your donation and your support. I really appreciate you being here.
Continuing to claim that he had won, while court after court threw out his lawsuits and states continued to certify their results. President Trump's falsehoods convinced a large number of Americans that he had won and that they were being cheated. The president also embarked on an incredible effort to pressure state election officials to change the results in their states. The most egregious example occurred on January 2nd. In an extraordinary phone call, President Trump could be heard alternating between lobbying, cajoling, intimidating, and threatening the election officials in Georgia. I just want to find 11,780 votes, he stated, seeking the exact number of votes needed to change the outcome in that state. Despite the president's pleas and threats, the Georgian officials refused to.
It's like she's reading the same exact speech that the last guy read. It's like almost the same, like word for word. You guys don't have to take turns crying the same speech. It's okay. You can cry in the car. We'll still dislike you just as much. It's okay.
That Congress was scheduled to count the Electoral College votes. Although this counting is a ceremonial and administrative act, it is nevertheless the constitutionally mandated final step in the electoral.
Oh, Hammerhead Fred, they're not going to cry in the mainstream. They're going to say it's lies and BS and who knows? They're going to scream Russia, Russia again. I don't know. They'll figure it out. They're not going to cry in the mainstream though. They're going to deny it. They might even say they won it. They might go out there on the mainstream and be like, yeah, he's impeached. I mean, who knows? They do whatever they want.
In response, some of his campaign supporters changed the date for protest rallies they originally had scheduled to occur after the inauguration to happen instead on January 6th. Having failed to persuade the courts and state election officials, President Trump next began to pressure Vice President Pence to use his role under the 12th Amendment to overturn the election. The president met with Vice President Pence on January 6th, then increased the pressure by tweeting hours later, "If the vice president comes through for us, we will win the presidency." That's what his tweet said. Vice President Pence, however, refused to yield. He issued a public letter on January 6th, making clear that his oath to support and defend the Constitution.
Well, Steve Pence, if they ever get done crying on here, I'd like to check that out. I'm not necessarily going to live stream it, but I'd like to see them throwing little tantrums in the hallways.
During his speech at the Ellipse on January 6, President Trump kept up that drumbeat of pressure on Vice President Pence. In front of a large, agitated crowd, he urged the vice president to stand up for the good of our Constitution. "I hope Mike has the courage to do what he has to do," President Trump concluded. Mr. President, rather than facilitating the peaceful transfer of power, President Trump was telling Vice President...
Oh, I wish Steve Pence. I wish Trump would walk in right now and be like, "Hey, I heard it's good news." They'd be so upset.
further agitating the crowd, directing them to march to the Capitol. In this situation, context was everything. Tossing a lit match into a pile of dry leaves is very different from tossing it into a pool of water. And on January 6th, the atmosphere among the crowd outside the White House was highly combustible, largely the result of an ill wind blowing from Washington for the past 2 months. President Trump had stoked discontent with a steady barrage of false claims.
Nancy, there is women's t-shirts and all of that. I'm not sure if you got into a weird part of the merch store. I made one of everything with the hooligan H on it. I didn't make dog sweaters, I don't believe. I had an option for that. But I made everything besides that. I even made socks. You just have to dig around. I think there's 3 women's shirts. Yeah, I made one of everything.
That set the stage.
Thank you so much, Amy, for your donation and your support. I really appreciate you.
In more than 200 years. Nearly 30 minutes after the Capitol first came under attack, members of Congress, law enforcement, and everyone else here in the Capitol waited in vain for the president to unequivocally condemn the violence and tell his misguided supporters to leave the Capitol. Rather than demand an end to the violence, President Trump expressed his frustration once again that the vice president had not stopped the vote certification as he...
Thanks for being here, TX Sweet Tea.
After the vice president...
No, not yet, Steve Pence, not yet. We'll see.
Avoid the menacing mob chanting, "Hang Mike Pence." President Trump tweeted, "Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what should have been done. Instead of preventing a dangerous situation, President Trump created one. And rather than defend the constitutional transfer of power, he incited an insurrection with the purpose of preventing.
Norman, we got whatever the sleeves, mask stuff. The Hooligan H one is cool. For the Hooligan H, instead of putting the H on the neck sleeve thing, I have it set up so it looks like war tears, and then it has the Jeff Mac logo across the neck of it. It's pretty cool. You should check it out. I dig it. I'm gonna order one. I just got a hoodie, a t-shirt, a wall thing, a tapestry. All that stuff turned out awesome.
Of the Capitol. Mr. President, this impeachment trial.
I can't read your name, but this is going on just so they can cry and tell us how butthurt they are. That's really all it's about from what I can tell, because the last person who cried for 15 minutes got to the end of it and said he wanted it striked from the record. So I don't know why they're crying. I don't know if they think we care or if the chairman cares, or not exactly sure. It doesn't make a difference. He was acquitted. All of this was proven not true. So they're just repeating the same nonsense that we've heard for 5 days now. They're just taking turns letting us know that they all feel the same way. That either they believe the lies or they want us to believe the lies, and they're mad that we don't believe the lies. I'm not exactly sure. They're butthurt for sure, though. That has been proven. That seems to be factual. Lots of evidence has been provided, showing lots of sand in their seats. They are butthurt, and that's factual evidence provided for 5 days now. That's about it. I don't know any more than that.
That is true. Without a doubt, the House should have been more thorough. It should have compiled a more complete record. Nevertheless, the record is clear that the President Trump, abused his power, violated his oath to uphold the Constitution, and tried almost every means in his power to prevent the peaceful transfer of authority to the newly elected president. Second is the contention that the First Amendment protects the president's right to make any sort of outrageous and false claims, no matter the consequences. But, Madam President, the First Amendment was not designed.
Thank you so much, Tia, for your donation and all your support. They don't have toddler clothing at the merch store for me to put together, but I know that a small fits like a 5 or a 6-year-old. One of my friends got a small Jeff Mac shirt, and it fits his kid. They don't have anything for toddlers at this point.
Their constitutional obligations. My vote in this trial stems from my own oath and duty to defend the Constitution of the United States. The abuse of power and betrayal of his oath by President Trump meet the constitutional standard of high crimes and misdemeanors. And for those reasons, I voted to convict Donald J. Trump. Thank you, Madam President. I yield the floor. Madam President, I suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
They changed chairs? Oh, good. I think they're wrapping it up. What are you talking about, Norman? I didn't say anything racist. You mean about the dog sweaters? Darn it. I don't know what else to say. Oh, I see, Amy. Well, good. I'm glad they got it on the record. Everybody took turns crying. How come they got to switch chairs, though? I understand that. We got to watch it, but the other guy that was sitting up at the chair, he got to go home? That's not fair. Yeah, I had to put the 5.2 because they came and they shut us down during the first part of this live stream. Happens. These things happen. It's not the first time they've come and shut us down. It's the first time they gave me the green screen, though. They shut it down and brought it back, and all they would show is a green screen. I don't know. They're tricky. They're tricky. But that's okay. Lots of people showed up to see how it ended, so that's all that matters to me. People need to see the truth. People will watch it. They're probably starting to watch it right now from the first part, the part 5 after the break. They're probably new people watching it right now. By the time they're done watching that, this will be over and they can watch this. It's after 5 o'clock here Eastern time. That's when people are getting out of work and they show up on the channel to watch what's been going live today. I notice all the comments. There'll be a influx of comments around 5 o'clock Eastern time. People will start commenting on the videos that aren't live anymore. So it's good. As long as people can see what actually happened, that's all that matters to me. Yeah, Norman, no, I totally understand. If you're not part of the narrative, then they come and try and shut you down, which is why, CommuTube treats me the way they do. They don't send out notifications. They shut me down. And then we got to go live 4 or 5 times for the same event. It happens. MC May Z. I have to watch the whole thing because of the archive, because this will be archived. And a lot of times at the end of an event, something crazy happens. On the first day, they got all the way to the very end of the event, and somebody in the crowd stood up who was being referenced by the liars. I don't know what else to call them. The house managers, I guess they are. They were referencing somebody who just happened to be in the crowd. And at the very end of the event, the trial for the day, stood up and said he wanted it striked from the record because it was false. The statement that they had made about him personally was false and wanted it wiped from the record. And then they tried to take a vote to decide whether or not it would be wiped from the record. And then they did wipe it from the record, but they wiped it without prejudice, which means that it could be brought back onto the record at any point if they found reason to do so. And then today, 5 days later, they did bring it back on the record, even though it had been proven false by the person they were talking about. So that's why you got to watch it to the end. And you don't have to necessarily sit around and watch it to the end if you don't want to. But I'm here to provide the truth, and that's the whole truth. And so I have to sit here until they shut it down, just in case something like that happens. I don't want that to be left off of my record, the recording that we have of this. So that's why I'm so adamant about sticking around until it's over. Well, Marlene, I was using an MXL 990. One of the hooligans sent me a Sennheiser MK4. So that's what I've been using now for, I think, a little over a week. Yep, I got it on Monday. I picked it up Monday. But the vice president of CAD Audio actually just reached out to me, and they're debating on endorsing me. Apparently, the vice president watches the show and likes the way that the information is delivered. So he reached out to me, and they're talking about endorsing me. And if that does happen, then I will tell you guys all about it. He wants me to let everyone know about him and the company and what they do and all of that. So if that, moves forward, we will talk about it. I'm thinking about making an actual video and uploading it, as well as doing shout outs and whatnot, depending on how it moves forward. Hey, thank you so much, Eddie. I really appreciate your donation and all your support. Thank you for being here. Yeah, I think whenever they wrap this up, I'm going to go check out everybody crying. I'm not going to live stream it. It's already started, and I don't, I got to catch it live from the beginning. So I'm not going to stream it, but I will definitely check it out because I want to see all their faces. I've been waiting to see their reactions and stuff since they won't show it on here. I can't believe Nancy's up there crying because she should have showed up here and started crying. Maybe that would have did something for their lies and cries that it got her up here crying. I mean, I didn't really want to see it, but Tommy Two Guns, you said something earlier that killed me. Totally killed me, and I couldn't say anything because they were talking. Would you say they had waterproof makeup, impeachment grade? That was hilarious. That was hilarious. It actually got flagged by YouTube, but I got it passed through. I don't know who all seen it, but big shout out to you because that was hilarious. Dawnbreak, the link to the Discord is in the description. If you guys are on a phone, you have to hit X on the live chat. The description is a drop down, and you'll see the link to the Discord. For anybody that's still watching, if you're new here, please subscribe, hit the bell icon, and join the Discord. The Discord is the only guaranteed way to get a notification for when and where we go live. Nothing else is reliable. For some reason, YouTube and everything else doesn't send out my notifications. But if you join the Discord, you will be notified directly by me every single time we go live. The Discord is a free app that you download on your phone. You come to any of my live streams, even if they're not live. In the description is the link that takes you directly to my server. You follow the steps, and you will be greeted with an automated message letting you know you've done all you need to do in order to be notified. Oh, don't say stuff like that, Matthew. You're going to get the chat removed. Yeah, I appreciate you, Lioness. Yeah, I recommend that to all of you. If you still got it in you, then go ahead and watch them cry and lie on Fox or wherever they are. But sometimes you got to pull out of it. I don't suggest that you just bury yourself in this stuff. It will wear you out. It definitely will cause mental breakdowns. I've probably had 3 mental breakdowns since I've started doing this. it's good to be aware of what's going on and to watch the truth, but to just watch the same thing when you already know the truth, you got to take a step back, listen to some music, go play with your kids, play the game, watch something funny, eat some food, eat good food. That's my biggest suggestion. I love eating food. That's my jam. I'm actually going to order pizza when I get off of here. Pizza and beer. It's my jam. It's my weekend jam. Yeah, Philip, and it can. Surrounding yourself with this kind of information can change your perspective of how you see your surroundings. It can make you edgy, aggressive, just simply unhappy. It can make you unhappy to know that there's so many people out here that believe the lie, who pass on the lie, lots and lots and lots of lies that is shown on mainstream. And when you see how bad it really is, you end up at the grocery store looking at people like, oh, I bet you're one of those liars. It's not good. It's not good. You got to step away from it and do something fun. Do something you like to do, because being happy is the wealthiest you will ever be. So you always got to make sure you're happy. Chasing cash is fine. Chasing truth is fine. But chasing happiness is the ultimate wealth. At least that's what I believe. These people need to come on. Are they going to wrap it up or what? I feel like they're getting ready to do something else. I mean, heard these people cry. Now we're going to sit here. I think they did that to us. I think it was earlier today. Sat here for a whole hour doing this. A whole hour of this. Then somebody got on the mic and they were like, yeah, we're going to go for recess for 45 minutes. They better not do that again. They need to wrap this up. Nancy's crying big time. Oh, I can't wait to see that. Well, if she felt so strong about it, maybe she should have showed up. They probably couldn't get her out of bed or wherever she was. Well, Sage Pup, if you didn't see, President Trump was acquitted. He is not guilty of inciting an insurrection, or however they phrase it. And then so far we've been just sitting here listening to me ramble on. Well, no, there was crying. There was crying. If you didn't see that, there was crying from 4 different people from both sides of the aisle. I see a lot of people are still caught up in that whole red team, blue team thing. But if you stand back, because I don't play red team, blue team, then you can see there's just liars and non-liars. It doesn't matter whether they're red team or blue team. I know a lot of people are stuck on that. I know in certain situations it matters. But a lot of people put their loyalty into that, and following something blindly is dangerous. So I think we've seen someone from both sides, red team and blue team, both crying and describing how, well, just how much their butt hurts over this. So that's about it. Since then, it's just been what you see on the screen. So I guess hopefully that's a good summary of what happened. Thank you so much, Zyklon, for your donation and all your support. I don't know about what you said. I Googled it, translated it. I don't know about all that. That's who they pray to, not me. That's why I play beats over them when they play, when they're praying at the beginning of these events. I know who they pray to. I've seen it. So I play beats over them. Maybe I don't know if all of you have noticed, but Pledge of Allegiance, National Anthem, they get silence. At specific rallies, I don't want to be too literal and get the whole thing shut down. At specific rallies I can trust, when they're praying to capital G God, God Almighty, and we let that go through, and we will do that in silence. Not these people. These people start praying, nah, they get the beats. It's just 808s over their nonsense. I see who they pray to. We're not dealing with that. What they call it, the Gigas, Codex Gigas. Pretty sure that's what they were praying over on Inauguration Day. If you don't know what that is, you should look it up. That's who they pray to. Matthew, you're killing me. You got flagged. Nobody can see what you said, but it is hilarious. Who said that, Steve Pence? Rat skin? Ratskin doesn't have to accept the L as long as he accepts that he needs a haircut and a bath. I really want to wrap this up. I know I can already tell the comments I'm going to get when people are sitting here for an hour. I know as soon as I shut this down, though, something crazy is going to happen. Somebody's going to do a cartwheel or a backflip. They're going to blame it on somebody else. People are going to start pointing fingers all aggressively. Maybe some head nods going on. Trying to get people to believe some lies. We'll see. I'll give it another 10 minutes. If nobody says anything, nobody does anything for 10 minutes, we'll wrap it up. Well, Matthew, everybody's entitled to their own opinions and stuff. I understand how you feel. I have people tell me I need Jesus all the time in the comments, how I need to find God, this, that, and the other. They have no idea that I was a chaplain for 2 years, a warrior of God, talking to people who are recovering from domestic violence, people who just lost everything in a house fire. I'm ordained. I can marry, bury, and baptize. And I have people telling me how I need Jesus and stuff in the comments. Everybody's entitled to their own opinion. It's okay. President Trump gave a press release? Really? That's interesting. I wonder if I got a notification for that. All right, I'll check it out, Steve Pence. Yeah, I don't think they're going to say anything else. I think you're right. I think they're just doing paperwork at this point. Yeah. Yeah, I think we could wrap it up. Why not? If something happens, it's my fault. Everybody can point their fingers at me and tell me how bad I am at my job. That's totally acceptable. Dang, it's only 9 a.m. in Australia. It's almost 5:30 here in Michigan. I'm about ready for some pizza and some beer. All right, we're going to wrap it up, everyone. Sorry, I'm apologize now. If anything happens, we're here till the end of whatever's going on here. I'm not going to make you guys sit through it any longer. So thank you guys so much for being here. I really appreciate you. Big shout out to everyone that made donations, joined the membership program, or purchased any merch. You guys are what's keeping the channel going. You're why I'm able to do this every day. So thank you guys so much. Anyone that's new, please subscribe, hit the bell icon, and join the Discord. Everyone should be a part of the Discord. It is the only reliable way to be notified when and where I'm going live. If you're not connected to me on Twitter and all that kind of stuff, please stick around after I am off the screen. I'm going to flood the chat with links that goes to everywhere. Follow me on everything. Stay connected to me as many ways as possible, because where they shut one thing down, we will be connected another way. That way I can get information to you, whether it's what happened to a situation or where we're going live from that point on. So please stick around till I am off the screen. You will get all them links. I want you to follow me everywhere. Thank you guys so much. I'm going to change the screen up here real quick, so just 1 second. All right, so I'm going to eat food. Maybe I'll take a nap. I'm not really sure. There probably will be stuff going on later. It is Saturday, and I know they were out and about yesterday. I actually had fallen asleep, but when I got up, I seen that Antifa was in Portland having a snowball fight. I seen that they were kind of harassing cops, but by the time I caught them, they were all ending their live stream and stuff. I don't think anything major happened, so we didn't really miss anything. But there probably will be stuff going on today, unless the weather is terrible, because apparently oppression doesn't happen in bad weather. But regardless of that, thank you guys so much for being here, and I will see you guys on the next live. So until then, stand tall, shine bright, and that's a wrap.